José López Bautista, a former federal police officer, was once considered a model husband and an ideal father. But a single phone call was all it took for his world to crumble. Inside his home in Tecámac, a chilling tragedy unfolded. His wife and two young daughters would not survive, and what the police discovered behind that door was something no one could have ever imagined. If you want to know all the details of this tragic event, I invite you to stay with us until the end. José López Bautista spent his childhood and adolescence in Iztapalapa, a borough south of Mexico City. Upon coming of age, he decided to join the ranks of the federal police, a force based in the capital but with jurisdiction across the entire country. It was in the line of duty that he met a woman who would change the course of his personal life. Esther Alicia Castro Luzanila. Esther hailed from Cocorit, a small rural town in the agricultural region known as the Yaqui Valley, in the southern state of Sonora. Despite their different backgrounds, José and Esther began a romance that quickly blossomed. The couple shared happy moments, and after about 2 years together, they received news that would change their lives. They were expecting their first child. At the time, José was still living with his parents in the family home. However, upon learning of Esther's pregnancy, he decided it was time to strike out on his own and start his own family. Seeking a new beginning, he and his partner moved to the municipality of Tecámac in the state of Mexico. They chose a house in the Bosques de los Cipreses subdivision, a residential area that offered them a place to settle down and raise their children. It was in this home that their new family began to grow. First came Alessandra, their first daughter. 3 years later, they welcomed their second daughter, Loreto. To their neighbors and acquaintances, José and Esther seemed to lead an ordinary family life, free of major troubles. However, those closer to them soon noticed some worrying behaviors. They remarked that José could be aggressive at times with a strong and sometimes intimidating personality. It was also known that the couple argued frequently, mostly due to his constant jealousy towards Esther, which created tension between them. Despite these conflicts, to many they still appeared to be a stable family, maintaining a facade of harmony, especially when seen spending time with their daughters. However, that apparent stability shattered the day José received a phone call related to his job. He was informed that he had been dismissed from his position with the federal police due to violent conduct displayed in the line of duty. The news of his dismissal was a devastating blow for José, and from that moment on, his behavior took a visible turn for the worse. According to some accounts, he became more hostile within the family. There are also reports suggesting he began using drugs after losing his job, although others claim he had already been involved with substances before his dismissal. The situation within the family grew increasingly tense and complicated. The arguments between José and Esther became more frequent, more intense, and harder to control. What were once occasional disagreements transformed into constant conflicts. José, affected by accumulated stress and his impulsive nature, began to exhibit more aggressive behavior. The violence, both verbal and physical, escalated over time. His attitude was no longer just harsh. It was becoming clearly dangerous. The impact of losing his job had profoundly affected him, sending him into a serious emotional crisis. This, combined with the problems at home, only worsened his mental state. Amidst this turmoil, in an attempt to find some control over himself and his emotions, José decided to step away temporarily. In December of 2017, he chose to attend a spiritual retreat. He spent several days away, ostensibly seeking calm, and returned on December 31st of that year. To this day, there is no single clear version of how the first moments of that night unfolded. Two main theories exist. The first suggests that after returning from the retreat, Jose went directly home to reunite with his wife and daughters. The second version, which has been more widely reported in the media, maintains that upon his return, Jose went straight to his parents' house to celebrate New Year's Eve, accompanied by his brother, his wife, and their two daughters. According to this second hypothesis, everything seemed relatively normal until, in the middle of the family gathering, Jose became agitated. At one point, for reasons that are still unclear, he began insulting Esther in front of everyone. The verbal argument quickly escalated. The tension rose to the point where a visibly out of control Jose demanded that his wife and daughters accompany him back to their home in Tecámac immediately. His parents tried to intervene. Worried about their son's emotional state, they asked him to calm down. They suggested he let the girls and Esther stay at their house for the night and that he go back alone. They even offered to drive their daughter-in-law and granddaughters home the next day. They tried to placate him, appealing to common sense. But Jose flatly refused to listen. He ignored all their pleas. His brother also joined the discussion, hoping to make him see reason. He tried to convince him to go home by himself, but he too was unsuccessful. Finally, unable to dissuade him and wanting to prevent the situation from becoming even more violent, Esther and the girls agreed to leave with him. They left his parents' house and got into a taxi with Jose, heading for the family home. Once they arrived at their home in Tecámac, the tension did not subside. It intensified. The argument between Jose and Esther continued inside, filled with reproaches and harsh words. Meanwhile, their daughters, unaware of the true danger brewing between their parents, began to play in another part of the house. The hours passed slowly as the atmosphere in the house remained heavy with tension. The intense argument, combined with the emotional exhaustion of the night, left them completely drained. With no energy left to continue, Jose and Esther decided to go to sleep, each lost in their own thoughts. As Esther lay down, she felt a sliver of relief. She thought the worst was over. She convinced herself that after a night's rest, her husband would calm down, and that the next day things might return to some semblance of balance. However, the reality was far different. Just as a calm seemed to settle over the house, Jose began to experience a disturbing episode. According to his later statements, he started hearing voices that he claimed were insistently speaking to him, giving him orders. It is highly probable that he was still under the influence of some psychoactive substance, possibly ingested during the spiritual retreat he had attended days earlier. In his altered mental state, these voices told him he had to murder his own family. Obeying these hallucinations, Jose rose in the middle of the night with a chilling determination. He went to his wife, Esther, and began to attack her brutally. Although she tried to fight back with all her strength, she stood no chance against a trained, physically stronger, and out-of-control man. The violence of the attack was so overwhelming that, tragically, Esther did not survive. After taking Esther's life, Jose went to the room where his two young daughters were sleeping. In a completely dehumanized act, he attacked them as they slept. The girls had no chance to react. The eldest, Alessandra, and the youngest, Loreto, lost their lives that same night. After committing the three murders, the man carried his daughters' lifeless bodies to the master bedroom. There he placed them next to their mother's corpse, arranging the three bodies on the marital bed as if staging a deliberate scene. Physically and mentally exhausted, Jose remained at the crime scene throughout the night, as if nothing had happened. But upon waking, far from confronting what he had done, Jose made even more disturbing decisions. In a desperate attempt to hide all traces of the crime, he manipulated the scene and tried to halt the visible effects of time. He used chemical products, hoping to keep the horror contained within the four walls. For the following days, Jose remained inside the house, completely isolated from the outside world. According to his own testimony, he began to exhibit extremely disturbing behaviors beyond all human comprehension. Meanwhile, outside the house, Jose's family was growing seriously concerned. After the heated argument on New Year's Eve, they had not had any contact with any member of the family. There were no calls, no messages, and no sign of life from Jose, Esther, or the girls. The total silence was alarming. His brother, who lived a short distance from the couple's house, decided to go check on them. He went to the address and knocked on the door, waiting for a response, but no one came out, and no sound was heard from inside. When he received no answer, he returned home with a growing sense of unease. As the days passed, they began speaking with the couple's close friends, trying to find out if anyone knew anything. They also decided to inform Esther's family about the situation, telling them what had happened the last time they saw them and about the strange silence since. Soon after, Jose's mother and Esther's sister decided to go to the house in person. They were determined to get inside no matter what it took, so they brought a locksmith with them to open the door. However, before he could do his work, Jose realized what they were trying to do and came out to confront the women. He asked them to leave him alone. He told them that Esther had abandoned him, that she had left and taken the girls, and that he was going through a difficult grieving process. He added that he didn't want to talk to anyone and asked them to leave. Since Jose was still legally inside the property, they couldn't force their way in without his consent, not even with the locksmith present. Both women were forced to leave, but Esther's sister was not convinced by what she had heard. She was certain that if her sister had truly decided to leave Jose, the first thing she would have done was contact her family, tell them what happened, or seek support. It made no sense for her to disappear without a word. Back at her home, her worry grew even more. She immediately began contacting Esther's closest friends, hoping one of them had news or knew where she might be. However, none of them had any information. With a complete lack of answers and fearing the worst, Esther's sister, along with other relatives, went straight to a police station. There, on January 7th, 20, they filed a missing persons report. Just as the report was being filed, something unsettling was happening in the neighborhood. For several days, neighbors had noticed a foul, fetid odor emanating from Jose's house. It was a pungent, hard-to-ignore smell, a clear sign that something was wrong. That morning, in addition to the smell, they saw something even more alarming, a column of black smoke pouring from the windows. The dense smoke quickly caught the attention of the community. Jose, inside the house, was burning clothes in the same room where the victims' bodies lay. The fire spread rapidly within the room, threatening to engulf the rest of the house. Alarmed, the neighbors called the fire department. The response was immediate. A unit arrived at the scene and managed to control the flames before the situation spiraled out of control. Once the fire was out and the area secured, police officers took the opportunity to enter the property. The ground floor appeared to be in order. There were no obvious signs of violence, no overturned furniture, no visible debris. As they began to call out for Jose to speak with him, the man slowly descended the stairs. He was holding a knife. His demeanor was tense, defiant, and his gaze was unfocused. The police tried to reason with him. They asked him directly about the whereabouts of his wife and daughters, but Jose maintained the same story he had given his family days earlier. He insisted that Esther had left him, that she had gone away with the girls, and that he didn't know where they were. He demanded that they leave him alone and leave his home. However, the officers were not willing to leave without verifying Esther's safety and well-being, especially considering the smell, the fire, and the man's erratic state. The exact moment of his arrest has not been fully clarified in the reports. but it is understood that José eventually confronted one of the officers. The situation turned violent, and during the struggle an officer shot him in the foot to subdue him. After he was wounded, they finally managed to restrain and arrest him on the spot. With José neutralized, the police conducted a more thorough search of the house. They went upstairs to the master bedroom. Upon entering, they discovered a horrific scene. Beneath a white and gray striped sheet lay the lifeless bodies of Esther and her 2 daughters. They were lying on the marital bed and had been in an advanced state of decomposition for at least a week. The discovery confirmed their worst fears. José was immediately transferred to a state prison in the state of Mexico, where he was held to face justice for the crimes he had committed. During his first formal interrogation, the man claimed to remember nothing. At first, he claimed to know nothing. He insisted he had no idea what had happened in his home over the past few days, or who could have so brutally murdered his wife and daughters. But after hours of questioning, under the immense pressure of the agents, José finally broke. He confessed. José stated that when he returned from a spiritual retreat on December 31st, he was still under the influence of certain substance. These, he claimed, had been given to him at the facility, a place supposedly designed to provide emotional and spiritual support. But instead of finding help, he alleged the drugs had profoundly altered his perception of reality. He began to hear voices that, he said, were not human. He described them as otherworldly, strange, insistent whispers that spoke to him with terrifying clarity, ordering him to commit a brutal act, to murder his own family. As the days passed and the media began to cover the case, the horrifying details of the crime came to light. The news spread like wildfire, eventually reaching José's own neighborhood. For his neighbors who had known him for years, the shock was absolute. No one could believe that the former police officer, a man many described as quiet, respectful, and devoted to his daughters, could have been capable of such an atrocity. The image they held of him as a protective father and a present husband was completely shattered. Disbelief was etched on every face. No one had ever suspected that José, a man who never showed a hint of such violence, could take the lives of the very people he was meant to protect. On January 13, 2018, the initial hearing in the legal proceedings against him was held. There, José was formally charged with the crime of femicide. However, during the hearing, he refused to give a statement. Through his defense team, he argued that he could not remember what had happened, citing a supposed memory loss. Based on this claim, his lawyer immediately requested psychological and psychiatric evaluations to assess his mental state. Unfortunately for him, the results of those evaluations were not in his favor. Specialists concluded that José was mentally sound and fully aware of his actions. He did not suffer from any serious mental illness that could have justified a claim of legal insanity. What they did find, however, were delusional episodes related to extreme, unfounded, and uncontrollable jealousy, which led him to interpret innocent situations as real threats. As the trial progressed and after months of investigation, José confessed everything. He finally admitted to murdering his wife and 2 daughters. In his subsequent statements, he provided a detailed description of every violent act he committed against them. He also acknowledged that his ultimate plan was to set the house on fire to destroy all the evidence, hoping to escape without a trace. Despite these confessions, he adamantly denied engaging in acts of cannibalism. The evidence collected at the crime scene, however, suggested otherwise. Furthermore, clues emerged linking him to a sect. According to some investigations, one of the alleged requirements for joining this group was to commit extreme acts, just like the ones he had carried out. The legal process lasted for 11 months and 7 days. The presiding judge, Paula Galicia, delivered her final verdict. She declared that José was a mentally healthy man, fully conscious of his actions, and capable of distinguishing between right and wrong. Therefore, she found him criminally responsible for the crimes committed and handed down a decisive sentence. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. In addition to the life sentence, he was ordered to pay a fine equivalent to around $50 for damages, and his civil and political rights were permanently suspended. As for the victims, the bodies of Esther, who was just 33 years old, and her two young daughters, 5-year-old Alessandra and 18-month-old Loreto, were transported from the state of Mexico to Cocorit, Esther's hometown in Sonora. There they were buried together in a ceremony heavy with grief. Esther had left her home years before, filled with dreams of a better life. She had hoped to build a happy family, to find stability, love, and a future. But her return was the most heartbreaking imaginable. She came back in a wooden coffin accompanied by her two daughters, innocent victims of the man she had once trusted. For months, the case was handled with a notable level of discretion, an attempt to keep it out of the public eye because of what it represented for the image of the institutions involved. Authorities considered the crime a direct blow to the credibility of the police force, as José had been a federal agent. To join that force, candidates must pass various psychological tests, tests which, in his case, were either insufficient or had failed completely. Although this case became known worldwide as the Cannibal of Tecámac, no official source has ever categorically confirmed or denied that detail. The accusation of cannibalism remains shrouded in rumor, with the justice system never issuing a conclusive statement on the matter. With a final sentence delivered and the perpetrator locked away for life, one could say that justice was served for the victims. José received the punishment he deserved. However, for the families of both, the pain is not eased by a conviction. The loss of Esther, Alessandra, and Loreto is a wound that can never be closed. No sentence, no matter how just, can ever bring back the 3 lives that were so brutally taken. Do you think the neighbor's silence might have delayed the discovery? Is it fair for acts like these to tarnish the image of entire institutions? What do you believe was the greatest mistake that allowed this to happen? We want to know your opinion. Let us know in the comments.